Oh, okay, that's good. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am at exact time.
Now still 5
Ladies
seconds.
and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, dear Professor Sarnaik and family. On behalf of the Danish Society, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the 2014 Husfeldt lecture. The first lecture was held by Professor Husfeldt in 1969, so today it is the 46th lecture. And I'm happy to welcome Professor in Critical Care Medicine at Children's Hospital of Michigan, Detroit Medical Center, Ashok Sarnaik. For several years, Professor Sarnaik has been corresponding with Preben Bertelsen because they share a mutual interest in the history of anesthesia. During these letters, Professor Sarnaik revealed a special relation to Professor Husfeldt, and eventually Preben Bertelsen wrote to me and the board and suggested Professor Sarnaik as this year's speaker. We found the story so interesting, and I'm happy to give the word to Professor Sarnaik.
Thank you so very much, Professor Wammen and Professor Bertelsen, for inviting me to deliver this prestigious Eric Husfeldt lecture. It's okay if I said Husfeldt instead of Husfeldt, because that's what I've been used to pronouncing his name. I'll try to pronounce it Husfeldt. This was established in 1969 to honor the legacy of Professor Eric Husfeldt. As I was preparing for this talk, I realized the great irony of the situation that I would be presumptuous enough to come to Copenhagen to talk about humanism in medicine, when it can be argued that modern humanism in medicine in fact began in this great city in the 1940s during the Nazi occupation of Denmark. To my knowledge, at least, no single profession has ever risen as one and stood up against tyranny in modern times to protect fellow humans as the medical profession in this country, with Copenhagen as its headquarters during this period. One of the references for my talk is Dr. Jürgen Keeler's captivating autobiography as a resistance fighter when he was a medical student. The entire Keeler siblings, Elsbeth, Bente, Jürgen, and Fleming, joined the resistance movement and were arrested by the Nazis with most of their adult life in front of them. Jürgen and Fleming were sent to concentration camps. There was a happy ending when, at the end of the war, the Keeler family was reunited. But not everyone was so lucky. Several members of the Jürgen Keeler's resistance group were killed in Denmark or in concentration camps. Dan Kasnelson, an accomplished ENT surgeon, in his exhaustively researched, recently published paper, Northern Light in White Coats, studied social, psychological, cultural, and professional factors that may have caused Danish physicians to behave in such an exceptional manner. The physicians and medical students were among the first to join the organized resistance and constituted the largest professional group in terms of percent occupation. 427 physicians and 177 medical students joined the resistance. Kasnelson concludes in his paper that this behavior is best explained by the parental upbringing, values of their professional society, and cultural ethos of the Danish nation as a whole. Kasnelson dedicates his article as a humble expression of gratitude by a once 2-year-old boy by standing crying and terrified on the deck of a small fishing boat in the cold night of October 8, 1943. Elias Bredsdorff, one of the resistance leaders and an author, thus wrote at the end of the war, "One should have thought that no difference would exist between the attitudes of teachers, lawyers, priests, doctors, etc. But that was all wrong. It can be stated with full certainty that from the very beginning, at times when only the few would participate in underground activities, there was one single professional group within the intellectual community that made a greater impact upon the underground activity than any other professional group, namely the doctors. Immortal honor was earned by the Danish doctors in that they, at such an early stage, were ready to participate in Denmark's struggle for freedom. So here I stand in front of you. I salute you today as the members of that fraternity which served as the beacon of light during the hours of darkness for the rest of humanity. It is difficult to describe what exactly constitutes humanism in medicine. The concept of humanism is really much more global than in individual relationships. Suffice to say, it is part of our ethos, a matter of conscience. It is the universal brotherhood preached by all major religions and cultures. A spirit connects all members of the human race. The best definition of humanism that I could find is the one I found in the Arnold P. Gold Foundation website. The humanistic physician demonstrates following characteristics with the mnemonics I.E. cares. I for integrity, represented by the congruence between expressed values and behavior. Excellence is demonstrated clinical expertise. C for compassion is the awareness and acknowledgement of the suffering of another human and the desire to relieve it. A for altruism is defined by the capacity to put the needs and interests of others before your own. R for respect is the regard for the autonomy and values of another person. E for empathy is the ability to put oneself in another's situation. And finally, perhaps the most important of them all is S for service, is exemplified by sharing of one's talent, time and resources with those in need, but giving beyond what is ordinarily expected. When one studies the remarkable life of Erik Husfeldt, and Professor Bertelsen and I share a lot of admiration for this great man, each one of these characteristics of a humanistic physician is abundantly demonstrated in this great person. Dr. Jorgen Roel, himself a freedom fighter and humanitarian, has carefully documented Professor Husfeldt's contribution as a physician, a humanist, and a resistance fighter. But more about that a little later. Let's look at what constitutes humanism in each and every one of us. Each one of our life experiences constitutes a fiber, if you will, of different length, texture, and color. The molecular structure of such a fiber looks something like this, familiar diagram here. We collect an adenine from somewhere and add a cytosine from somewhere else, a thymine here and a guanine there, then lay them all in various combinations as base pairs and incorporate them in a scaffold of sugar phosphate backbone. That forms our spiritual as well as our professional DNA. Eventually, all these fibers make us the very being that we are. Each one of us is unique and yet bonded together by a common thread. And that thread, that passion, that culture unites us and brings us all together in common fellowship to improve the ability to take care of the sickest of the sick while improving health conditions for all. The objective of my talk today is to describe 7 valuable, epiphany-provoking lessons in humanism that served as the essential fibers of my career. I will talk about how these lessons were inspired by mentors from all walks of life who exhibited the qualities that are embodiment of humanism and which I have strived ever so hard to acquire. My hope is that these lessons will be useful to young physicians who still have the better part of their careers ahead of them. The title of the first lesson is of God and humans. Now, people are generally reluctant to speak at scientific meetings about their beliefs in God. But Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project before becoming the director of National Institute of Health, wrote this book called Language of God. Now, without going into too much detail, the basic tenet of Dr. Collins' book was that you can be a credible scientist and still believe in God. Now, my first scientific experiment on this issue came about when I was mere 5 years old. My sister Suman, shown here, served as my mentor. Suman was 13 years my senior. We had the same birthday. Suman had a profound impact on my early childhood development. She was the first teacher to instill humanism into me. A woman of lower caste, not looking much different than the lady shown here, used to come to our chawl, a low-income housing structure such as this here, to clean toilets and sweep the compound. She was considered untouchable. The older children in the chawl used to say that if you touched her, you will get a disease. After working under a scorching sun, she would ask for water. I used to love obliging her by pouring cold water into her cupped hands. Seeing her satisfied expressions after quenching her thirst used to bring immense joy to me. But I was told to be careful. The older children said, don't let that water from her hands splash on your feet, otherwise you will get worms in them. Suman taught me about God. She told me God is everywhere. I asked her if there was God in that untouchable woman. Of course, Suman said. God is as much in her as in you and me. But I was not so sure. So I decided to test Suman's hypothesis. The next time I poured water into the old woman's hand, I made sure that some of it did splash on my feet. Nothing happened that was bad. Growing bolder, the next few times I purposely touched her hands. First time making it look sort of accidental, but next time definitely purposefully. I was happy to note, but also much relieved, that nothing untoward happened to me by touching that so-called untouchable woman. I did not get worms in my hands or feet. Suman's hypothesis was correct. This experience provided unassailable evidence to that 5-year-old boy that God exists everywhere, in all of us, and especially in the downtrodden. Later in my career, this conviction grew even stronger with all the helpless and poor children that we care for on a daily basis, that doing so is indeed to serve God. Now, aren't we all fortunate that our place of work is also conveniently happens to be our place of worship, and that we don't have to go to churches or temples or mosques or synagogues to serve God? God is right where we work. Now I believe in Swami Vivekananda's teaching of Advaitism that he preached over 100 years ago. Every human has a soul, and the sum of all those souls is God. There are beautiful concepts of brotherhood in almost all cultures. One such concept is that of Ubuntu. The word Ubuntu has its origin in the Bantu languages of southern Africa. It is a classical African concept that states, I am what I am because of who we all are. Or more simply, I am because he is. Archbishop Desmond Tutu says a person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole and is diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed. We must treat all our patients, regardless of their disease or deformity, with respect and dignity, for doing otherwise is to demean ourselves. In ancient India, the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam has been the main message of the Vedantic philosophy. Vasudha means the earth and Kutumbakam means a family. The general message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is, this is my relative and that is a stranger, is the calculation of the narrow-minded. For the magnanimous hearts, however, the entire earth is but one family. Lesson number 2 in humanism is entitled, It Takes a Village, which is an African saying about raising a child. A successful career does not happen in a vacuum. It takes the right environment, right opportunities, key human interactions, and even a few adversities thrown in between. My first break came with the family I was born in, youngest of 9. This is Aka, my mother, and Abba, my father. We were a lower middle class family with no luxuries but all the necessities. Education was highly valued. For Abba and Aka, children always came first. We were a very tightly knit family. I'm grateful to my training in Grand Medical College and JJ Hospital in Mumbai. Our teachers always stressed the basic sciences and pathophysiology as fundamental requirements for clinical diagnosis and management, and an approach that I still practice and preach. Many role models leave an indelible influence that shapes our lives. Who but our valued teachers, all the way from elementary schools to Institute of Advanced Education, help us on our life journey from ignorance and darkness to truth and light. Two of the early role models for me were Dr. Prabhakar Udami and Dr. Y.K. Ambedkar. And when I came to the USA for further training, I could not have possibly landed in a better place than the Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit. It welcomed me with open arms and nurtured me all the way through my early developmental stages. I had wonderful teachers at Children's Hospital during my training, such as Paul Woolley, William Grunemeyer, Les Pensler, and Sanford Cohen. They continued to stoke the flame of passion for pediatrics that was ignited by my Indian teachers. While our teachers provide us with necessary scientific facts to deal with the daily challenges, if we are really fortunate, we come across someone who assumes the role of a guru, a mentor whose disciple we become. The word guru is composed of two syllables, gu, which stands for darkness or ignorance, and ru, which means dispeller. It is our guru who is always there as a guiding light in our moments of darkness and self-doubt. The person who had the greatest influence on my career was Dr. Robert Gregg, who was the chief of pulmonology. He was an astute clinician and a strict disciplinarian, and he seemed capable of doing practically anything. One of his greatest and most attractive attributes was to challenge existing dogma, something that I have enjoyed doing throughout my career. And no one has lived the motto of our mother institution, the Grant Medical College, Mens Sana in Corpore Sano, more exemplarily than my wife Ingrid. Sound mind in sound body. Here she is as a university professor, an accomplished investigator, and an outstanding physician with two of her patients, twins with sickle cell anemia. And here she is as an athlete winning medals in United States National Senior Olympics. Ingrid has been my greatest supporter throughout my career. I am much grateful to these people and institutions that constitute my village. So lesson number 2, which is precursor of developing humanism, is gratitude. Be grateful to your teachers, to your institutions, and for all the opportunities that have been provided to you. It is this feeling of gratitude that will provide you the necessary strength to withstand the rigors of a productive career. Gratitude is prerequisite to success and happiness, whereas a sense of entitlement only breeds for excuses and failure. Cicero is 100% correct when he said, gratitude is not only the greatest of all virtues, but the mother of all others. Now, humanism in medicine, lesson number 3. Death be not the end. Perhaps no other environment exposes the emotional vulnerability of a physician like pediatric intensive care. This is for a number of reasons. Our patients are easy to identify with our own children or young relatives. Success and failure of our efforts can literally mean life or death. The emotional swings associated with saving someone's life and losing someone to death are all too frequent for us. So in order to make it through the daily struggles, we all develop our own little defense mechanisms which actually sometimes are necessary. Unfortunately, all too often I see physicians getting in the habit of explaining away a patient's death as a result of an unavoidable inevitability of the disease process. We say during these times, we did everything possible. The disease was just too severe. Somehow that provides a comfort zone to us that the patient died in spite of our best efforts and nothing else could have been done. I would caution against using this logic, especially in situations that are puzzling. We must always keep these patients with us, even after their deaths, and continue to seek answers. It may take months or sometimes years for such an answer to come. But when it comes, many other lives will be saved. I took care of Ruby Smith. She was a 7-year-old girl for stage 4 Rye syndrome. This was in 1976, a year before I became a pediatric intensivist. This was before the days of routine intracranial pressure monitoring. We simply used mechanical ventilation and mannitol osmotherapy based on clinical examination that consisted of just pupillary response and muscle tone. I took turns with my fellow, staying up at Ruby's bedside 24 hours a day. Ruby developed complications of hyperosmolality and renal failure requiring peritoneal dialysis. But she was improving neurologically little by little. After a week or so, she was opening her eyes and she started to yawn, something the senior pediatric intensivist might remember as being the first signs of awakening from the coma of Rye syndrome. Most of the patients who regained consciousness after Rye syndrome had excellent neurologic recovery and went on to live normal life. I was ecstatic. I extubated Ruby and told her parents that Ruby was going to be awake the next day, to go home, rest up, and come back in the morning. I went home that night, tired, weary, but exhilarated that Ruby had made it. In the middle of that night, I got a call that Ruby had stopped breathing and her pupils were fixed and dilated. I rushed back only to see the unmistakable signs of cerebral herniation and brain death. I had no answer as to what had happened and why it happened. I asked the neurologists and all the other experts. They didn't know either. Everyone told me that such things do happen despite our best efforts. I was young and inexperienced, but I knew that there had to be an explanation. And the explanation did come a couple of years later with more clinical experience and better understanding of the brain's unique response to its osmolar environment. It became clear to me that Ruby had died of cerebral edema from osmotic disequilibrium. We were treating her non-oligolic renal failure with replacement of urine output and insensible losses at a very time when her brain was still saturated with idiogenic osmos and avidly imbibing the free water that we were giving her. The knowledge gained was valuable as we were able to save many other patients with similar illnesses. We used that knowledge that Ruby gave us to take care of many more children with Rye syndrome and similar pathophysiologic states such as diabetic ketoacidosis encephalopathies, head injuries, and CNS infections. Here is David Yavenditti with stage 4 Rye syndrome being monitored with the old Richmond screw here. And here he is, several days later, on his road to full recovery, sticking his tongue out at the physicians and nurses, a completely normal behavior for a 7-year-old. As for Ruby, she remains some of my most valued teachers, helping me in caring for patients with altered brain metabolism. After Ruby died, her mother gave me this picture of Ruby and told me never to forget her. It was a promise that was very easy to keep, and today I introduce Ruby to you. Lesson number 3 in humanism is what I call the Ruby Smith law. Do not explain away an adverse outcome as a result of unavoidable inevitability of the disease process. Someone's son or daughter just died. Keep asking why. The answer will come eventually, and it will make you a better physician. Lesson number 4 is about the power of keeping the mind and the eyes connected. It is kind of a takeoff of the blind man and the elephant story. Not many people know this, but this story actually originated in ancient India and is first attributed to Gautam Buddha, who used to illustrate to his disciples to open up their minds and look at the big picture, otherwise they will see only what they want to see. Approximately 25 years ago, I was at University of Illinois as a visiting professor. Dr. Vidyasagar, who was the chief of neonatology, showed me this X-ray of a newborn and asked me to comment on it. So I looked at it, and immediately it was clearly obvious that this was a small infant. The lung volume was small, diminished, and there was diffuse ground glass appearance with air bronchograms. Hyaline membrane disease, I said matter-of-factly. What else, he asked. I looked at the X-ray again, this time a little bit more carefully. I looked at the bones, found nothing wrong. I looked at the abdomen and commented that this baby is only a few hours old, since air is still limited in the small intestine, and not yet reached the large intestine. But I saw no evidence of bowel obstruction, and I was puzzled. Frankly, I couldn't see anything else. Then Vidyasagar pointed out to this structure and asked me, what is this? And I said, oh my God, that's a tail. This was a baboon neonate with hyaline membrane disease, an experimental model that Dr. Vidyasagar was working with. I had missed the simple observation of a tail at the end of the sacrum, which might as well have been wagging at me, and I still might not have seen it. How could I have missed such a striking finding? Then it dawned on me that the possibility of an existence of a tail was farthest from my mind. It was a humbling experience, but I took it as lesson number 4, which is your eyes don't see what your mind does not think. The corollary to this lesson is that your eyes see only what your mind thinks. So you got to think beyond what is obvious. The lesson also applies to humanism in medicine. Too many times we see the patient with a disease process. Oh, that's a gastro, that's a pulmonary embolism, or a surgical procedure. Oh, that's a Whipple, or that's a Norwood operation, or a laboratory value, and forget that there is a real human being behind all the tubes and the equipment. We need to open up our minds and see the whole picture. That person is someone's son, or a daughter, or a brother, or a sister, or a husband, or a wife, or a father, or a mother. We need to see the human side of the disease. The lesson number 5 in humanism, the title is Greatness Comes in All Packages. There are many lessons in life that come from unexpected sources. And in our aura of self-importance or even arrogance, we are prone to ignore these lessons. This is a story of a boy named Victor. 15 years ago, I went to the Philippines on an Operation Smile mission. It was an amazing experience. The surgeons operated on about 150 children with cleft lips and cleft palates in 10 days. My assignment was to make sure there was no airway compromise post-operatively. We worked all day and a few hours into the night, slept on little cots in the hospital room, hearing the rats running around the floor. Warm water was hard to come by, and our meals were cooked by the local people. I was feeling so proud of all my sacrifices. This university professor giving up personal comforts to take care of poor children. How great is that? Then, one day, a 14-year-old boy scheduled for the cleft palate repair did not show up for his surgery. His name was Victor Cortez. People had to travel several hundred miles for the surgery, and no-shows were very unusual. But with no sign of Victor Cortez, we went along with our daily routine. As afternoon rolled around, a nurse informed me that there was a 14-year-old boy in the pre-op area, asking her when they were going to do his operation. I asked her the patient's name. Victor Cortez, she said. What in the world is he still doing in the pre-op area when he was supposed to be the first patient in the morning? I asked, somewhat annoyed of the inconvenience that this boy was going to cause me. What she told me next was nothing short of incredible. One of the children had spilled water on the floor. Victor took a mop and started cleaning the floor. Another nurse mistook him for a janitor and gave him other cleaning responsibilities. Since he didn't have a cleft lip, only the cleft palate, and since he didn't speak English and kept silent, his cleft palate was unrecognizable. He looked like a normal boy. No one suspected Victor was a patient. Victor kept helping out with one thing or the other, including carrying blood samples to the lab until he could not help anymore. You see, he had been NPO, nothing by mouth, since the night before. And now he was getting hypoglycemic and feeling rather faint. When I heard of this, I felt so small for feeling so proud about my own little inconveniences. When this boy of meager means gave so much of himself with no expectations whatsoever of a reward. Victor Cortez, not Ashok Sarnaik, was following Lord Krishna's edict, Karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, meaning do your duty, never expecting the reward. So, humanism lesson number 5 is greatness does come in all packages. When you give, don't glow in self-adulation, but just give and then give some more. The only reason you give more is because you have more to give. Humanism lesson number 6 is about teacher-student relationship. To nurture and to be nurtured are among the most cherished of all human interaction, starting from birth. In the academic world, these revolve around the teacher-student relationship. As Lacombe points out, you have teachers, each with students numbering in the thousands, all linked with each other down through the ages, forming a vast dendritic coalescence of medical knowledge. This network without walls and borders stretches across continents and cultures with a common language of fellowship and duty. We must consider both learning and teaching as our sacred obligations to our discipline. So open up your knowledge bank and let everyone share in it freely. And publish your research findings and books and chapters and review articles. You may save someone's life who may be thousands of miles away from you. In March of 1972, I took care of a dying newborn, looked just like this, with hyaline membrane disease. His arterial PO2 was only 26 in 100% oxygen. I was only a first-year resident then, with no seniors to turn to. I had heard of George Gregory's seminal article on using continuous positive airway pressure in hyaline membrane disease, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine just a few months ago. We didn't have any respiratory therapists at this hospital, nor did we have infant ventilators. So I went to the library, copied the diagram of CPAP assembly, and with the help of an enthusiastic nurse, arranged a CPAP delivery for the little cyanotic baby struggling to stay alive. Amazingly, the baby pinked up over the next few hours. Little Frankie Monaco had a rather stormy course over the next couple of weeks, but he survived and went home. His mother sent me this picture when he was 7 months old. Frankie Monaco is now 42 years old and is currently a captain on a commuter ship of Hilton Head in South Carolina. He is blissfully ignorant that he was saved by Dr. Gregory's invention of this little apparatus to deliver continuous positive airway pressure to his surfactant deficient lungs. George Gregory was right in the room, if not in flesh, but in influence, guiding me as I was treating little Frankie. One of the greatest joys I have experienced is seeing my students outperform their teacher and go on to different parts of the world serving critically ill children. They have far surpassed me in many areas, and that is how it should be. The Humanism lesson number 6 is written on this coffee cup given to me by one of my students. To teach is to touch a life forever. Now, throughout history, many men and women have made great contributions to mankind. They are the saints, the scientists, the Mahatmas, the philosophers, and the freedom fighters. They have won Nobel Prizes and wide acclaim and recognition. But for each famous person, there are hundreds of great souls serving small corners of humanity in relative anonymity. The human race is heavily dependent on them to maintain its moral compass. Humanism lesson number 7 is about such everyday heroes. This is a story of one such great man in whose honor this lecture is being delivered, Eric Husfeldt. It may be presumptuous of me as a foreigner coming to Denmark and recounting the accomplishments of a national hero in front of his own countrymen. But remember, the whole world was Eric Husfeldt's country. So please bear with me a little. Professor Husfeldt is not only well known for his tremendous contributions in the field of cardiothoracic surgery, medicine, anesthesia, and world health, but also for his fight for justice, principle, and freedom. From 1940 to 1945, Hitler's Nazi army occupied Denmark. This is a period that is referred to as the occupation in your history. Dr. Husfeldt's professional career as a cardiothoracic surgeon was about to peak during this time. Young Eric was as fearless as he was principled. As a member of a secret physicians organization, he personally delivered the petition with 425 signatures to the Internal Affairs Minister that demanded the government stand fast against increasing Nazi demands. In 1941, he was one of the founding members of a group which evolved into the resistance organization, Ringen or the Ring. In September of 1943, around the time when the Nazis raised the Jewish question, a clandestine body named Danish Freedom Council was set up to organize the efforts of the resistance. People didn't know the identity of this group until the war was over. Eric Husfeldt was one of the founding members. Here he is along with his fellow Freedom Council members. At great risk not only to his professional career, but also to his personal safety and his life, Eric Husfeldt went underground with a cover name as Mr. Jensen. During the day he was Professor Eric Husfeldt, but underground he was known as Architect Jensen. Only the other members of the ring knew that Professor Husfeldt and Architect Jensen was the same person. In the eyes of the Nazis, Architect Jensen was an extremely dangerous and subversive person. The Gestapo was constantly on the lookout for him. Eric Husfeldt frequently traveled to neighboring Sweden to organize his freedom fight and, among other things, to purchase Swedish submachine guns for his freedom fighter colleagues. Can't imagine this cardiothoracic surgeon going to Sweden and buying submachine guns. Back home in Copenhagen, Husfeldt was part of an operation to rescue thousands of Danish Jewish brothers and sisters, estimated in fact to be around 7,800, admitting and hiding them in hospitals under false identities until they could be transported away to the fishing boats which would take them across the Straits of Øresund to safety in Sweden. There were many sites for departure from Denmark and arrival in Sweden. Eric Husfeldt had a summer cottage very conveniently located on the Øresund. He assumed another identity as fisherman Peter Jorgensen for this rescue operation. Amazingly, 100% of people thus rescued survived. In the final analysis, 99% of Danish Jews survived the Holocaust because of the brave and selfless efforts of people like Eric Husfeldt and other members of the resistance. Far more non-Jewish Danes died at the hands of the Nazis than their Jewish brethren. There is a garden of the righteous among the nations in the Yad Vashem complex in the Mount of Remembrance in Jerusalem to recognize non-Jewish individuals who rescued Jews from the Nazi atrocities. And there is a wall for the righteous among the nations with the names of these individuals listed on the wall. In a remarkable gesture of solidarity with their countless unnamed colleagues, the members of the Danish underground who participated in the rescue of Danish Jews requested to be listed as one group, no individual names. What a selfless act. Eric Husfeldt's contributions as a freedom fighter was well recognized both in Denmark as well as abroad. In 1945, he was part of the Danish delegation in the San Francisco Conference that formally established the United Nations Charter. And here he is in 1951, seen presenting a gold hedgehog as a symbol of bristling Western defense to the then General Dwight Eisenhower in Roquencourt, France. You can see he towers over Eisenhower. When the war was over, architect Jensen and Peter Jorgensen again became Dr. and Professor Husfeldt, making important contributions in the field of cardiothoracic surgery. He created the anesthesiology center in Copenhagen, thus establishing Denmark as the leader in the field. And in 1953, he became the chief of thoracic surgery at Rigshospitalet. If he was content after all these accomplishments, who could have blamed him? But to Dr. Husfeldt, there was much more work to be done. And I'm so happy that he thought so. Dr. Husfeldt's greatest passion was healthcare in the developing countries that were left woefully behind in medical advances. Husfeldt considered this disparity in healthcare an injustice and lack of basic human rights. He was far ahead of the times in the concept of global health. He plunged into global health efforts of World Health Organization and Red Cross with even greater energy and enthusiasm, traveling all over the world, helping the poor. In 1953, Erich Husfeldt led a team of doctors sponsored by WHO and the Unitarian Service Committee of the United States. They went to India, Burma, and Ceylon. Now, before Dr. Husfeldt's visit in these parts of the world, thoracotomy was a kiss of death. Anesthesia consisted of a nurse pouring ether on gauze over a wire mesh held on a patient's mouth and nose. And no such things as respirators existed. Intensive care unit as a concept had not been fully developed even in the Western world. Erich Husfeldt operated on so many patients who were otherwise considered inoperable and who depended on his surgical skills for survival. He came to Mumbai and operated on 20 children at KEM Hospital in February of 1953. Only 4 children survived, 80% mortality. This was because of very poor post-operative care. Because of this high mortality, Husfeldt wondered if he was doing the right thing. Was it really worth it with so many children dying after surgery? But one of the survivors was this 6-year-old Indian boy whose left lung needed to be removed because of extensive bronchiectasis caused by repeated infections from a peanut aspiration. Without surgery, he would have succumbed to chronic suppurative lung disease. About a dozen years later, that same patient wrote to Erich Husfeldt to express his gratitude and to tell him that he was now in medical college, studying to be a doctor, and he asked for his picture. The ink has faded somewhat through the years, but the message remains strong. To my former patient and now colleague, Ashok Sarnaik, Professor E. Husfeldt, with best wishes. Now you know why this invitation has meant so much for me. Erich Husfeldt's legacy lives through me, through many lives he has touched, including mine. And this is the magic and romance of the field of medicine that has attracted all of us kindred spirits to this wonderful profession. Service to humanity was Husfeldt's mission in life, and it is the most important component of humanism in medicine. Unconditional service with no expectations and great personal sacrifice are the hallmarks of a karma yogi, one whose actions are not prompted by desires. Dr. Erich Husfeldt was a karma yogi. While most of us may not be able to attain that status, at least some of our life's activities of that nature are within our reach, and we must make every effort to engage in them. Danish sculptor Anker Hoffmann built this bust of Erik Husfeldt. Dr. Husfeldt's life was a profile in courage, dedication, excellence, and service in humanity. Erik Husfeldt has always been an everyday hero for me. The Humanism lesson number 7, learned from Husfeldt's inspirational life story, is beautifully captured by the poem Indian poet Dr. Rabindranath Tagore. I slept and dreamt that life was all joy. This is what we do in our childhood and youth. I awoke and saw that life was but service. These are our days of daily grind and drudgery. I served and understood that service was joy. Hopefully that is what we will all experience in our days of fulfillment. Thank you again for inviting me and allowing me to pay homage to your national and my personal hero, Erik Husfeldt. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was very, very touching. And I really think this was an amazing story. Now, there is a drink out in the foyer, and then we'll go on to the dinner. But once again, thank you so much.